Welcome to another ethereal episode of the Hallow Ian Horror Pod, an extension of the Hallow Ian Horror Hour. I'm your host this week, Brianna Malaki, and I'm joined by my co-host, Hallow Ian.
Hello, Brianna.
You can support the Hallow Ian Horror Pod by rating and reviewing the show wherever you listen. You can also watch full episodes of the TV series on Tubi, Plex, SCC TV 28 in the Seattle area, or YouTube. We also have a Patreon where you can get bonus episodes, watch-alongs, and other perks. All the links are in the description. This week, we're diving into the haunted history of paranormal investigation. To help us lay out this scary saga of cursed items, terrifying tools of the trade, and look into some chilling characters that made it their lives' work, we have our ghost hunting guest joining us, Brian Blackwood.
Hello, guys.
So, just to start us off, I wanted to begin with a simple question. Do you believe in ghosts / the paranormal?
I am a skeptic. I would call myself an open skeptic, as in I am doing this almost specifically to get an experience that I cannot explain. I'm looking to be moved, but it hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Very reminiscent of, I know you also watch Ghost Files, the Ryan and Shane duo, and Shane's just along for the ride of, I'll believe it if it happens. That
Yeah,
sort of mentality.
that's one of my
How about,
favorite shows. Absolutely.
yeah, they're great.
I am very much agnostic across the board. I really want there to be something, but I also have this belief that it's kind of our relationship to everything. Like whether something is haunted, whether there's aliens, whether there is any sort of like spiritual stuff, I believe it is our relationship to it. It's a little bit of a psychic phenomena. There is something going on, but I think it has more to do with the question of what is consciousness. So that's a big existential way of thinking about it. But I am very interested in the subject, and I really hope there is more to existence than what we understand.
Well, I love that we have very different takes because I do believe in ghosts. I'm completely open to it. Like, if you're staying somewhere supposedly haunted and you hear a noise, I think ghost before I think piping. So this should be a lot of fun.
It looks like we
And
span the gamut pretty well here.
that's what I was like. We're a full spectrum of do you believe in ghosts or not? Going into the history of paranormal investigations and ghost hunting, it's been around for a long time. Even if you consider some old folklore, ghost stories, all of that, but sort of over here in this side of the world with the spiritualism. And so I think you guys had something to say about the Fox sisters and mediums and that spiritual aspect.
Yeah, I love this history of spiritualism and kind of how it has shaped our modern context of the paranormal. And I think that really starts out with the Fox sisters. There were two younger sisters and an older sister, and they kind of came up with a way to communicate with spirits through rapping. The if you're here, knock twice, yes, that kind of thing. And it was a very early form of this kind of communicating with ghosts that led into things like mediums and seances, which were very popular in the late 1800s, and then kind of had a revival in the 70s. And I think, people are doing those things for fun now, but I think there's an opportunity for that to come around again. Like people want to be able to contact people they've lost. I think it really hit its peak between like the Civil War and World War One, where people were losing a lot of people, and they wanted to communicate with the dead, and there was all sorts of tools like scrying sheets, the early development of the Ouija board or like the planchette, like letter kind of stuff, spirit trumpets, which are kind of an early version of like your spirit box. And then I'm also, the history of Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the author of the Sherlock Holmes books, Sherlock Holmes being the most rational man ever to exist, yet his author, Arthur Conan Doyle, was married to a medium who claimed to speak with the dead, and he also believed in those fairy pictures. I'm forgetting the name of the two girls that took the pictures with the fairies, but he firmly believed that that was absolutely true. And he was friends with Harry Houdini, and actually brought Houdini to his wife to have a seance and try to communicate with Houdini's mother, who he was very, very close with. He described himself as a mother's boy before the word mama's boy existed, and or the phrase. And Houdini, went along with this, and he thought it was going to be
Yeah.
very interesting. But Arthur Conan Doyle's wife did the séance and did all of this automatic writing. I'd say that with quotation marks. But she wrote it all in English, and Houdini's mother never spoke in English. So he
Mhm.
then had just a massive vendetta against mediums and psychics, and he would actually dress in costume and go to these seances, and he would turn on the lights and flip over the table, and he actually got legislation passed saying that you weren't allowed to use these performative measures to prey on people that were grieving. And so for a long time, like, there was, it actually became outlawed to do these kinds of things, where him as a magician, he was like, no, this is a trick. I'm just a charismatic person. I'm bringing entertainment. He really hated anyone that was preying on anyone that was,
Mhm.
actually grieving or like looking for some sort of person that had passed away. So I find all of those things just really interesting and how that all intertwined in the late 1800s and the early 1900s.
Yeah. Yeah, seances were really popular. Even the Winchester house, Mary Winchester would hold, I believe, like nightly seances while she was building the house. I could see how there would be a resurgence of these old school tactics with I mean, Ouija boards are sold in board game section of stores.
You were mentioning, this Victoria era as this kind of birth of modern ghost hunting, and it goes even deeper than that. The Ghost Club was founded in 1862, and it had figures like Charles Dickens as one of its members, um, and Henry Sedgwick, and its purpose was to bridge the difference between what they thought was spiritual, the spiritual world, with physicists and actual scientists. They want to bring them all into a room and go through these procedures and see whether or not there was any scientific bias. Well, they weren't calling it ghost hunting at the time, but mediumship and spiritualism and communicating with the dead. So the Victorian era was definitely it was a resurgence of getting in contact with those that had passed. We had viewing rooms where in our own homes where the loved one that passed would be put on display, and our relationship to that person was celebrated, and death itself was not shoved into the corners of everyday life. So as a result, it kind of goes hand in hand. When you have open spiritualism, you eventually get into open communication, and relationships with the dead then flourish from that.
Yeah, and we could really get into like a whole like anthropological discussion of like how different cultures relate to the dead. So I think we're really focused on kind of like Western ghost hunting in this episode, but there is a lot of like different perspectives and a very wide spectrum of how people relate to their dead, whether it's, every couple of years going into the tombs and bringing their bodies out and inviting them to dinner, all the way to us kind of like trying to rationalize it and just put that person like in our modern context, whether it's through cemeteries or through cremation. We don't have kind of the direct contact with the dead in the modern American culture that some other cultures have.
Yeah. So speaking of more of the modern times, I think a lot of people know about the Warrens. When they think of ghost hunting, that's probably one of the first things that a majority of the population will recall. They'll be like, oh, right, the Warrens, the ghost hunter couple. What are your takes
Yeah.
on the Warrens? I know they're in pop media, but
Well, you're now getting into essentially the ghost hunting power couple that brought a lot of ghost hunters into the scene entirely. They saw the Conjuring movies and then went back to look at what inspired these movies, or they already knew about the Warrens from popular media, but they were really the forefront of modern ghost hunting, even to the detriment of their own reputations for a while. So you got Ed and Lorraine Warren, right? You have Ed, who was a self-proclaimed demonologist. He was very spiritual, raised in the Catholic faith, I believe, really embodied that side of going into investigations, that it has a spiritual or even a religious bend to it. And then you had Lorraine, who was a medium. She was a psychic and would pick up on the residual energies or psychic impressions in the area. And it's not talked about a lot when it comes between the two of them, but Lorraine was actually the one trying to bring more of the scientific side into the investigations. And I'm putting an asterisk on that word scientific, but what I mean by that is that she was focusing on what we would be calling in modern ghost hunting terms, residual psychic energy, right? Echoes,
yeah.
where even if you don't believe in ghosts, you might believe that enough emotion or enough personality or just energy in an area can manifest over time into a spiritual haunting. And that's where she was kind of going into. But between the two, yeah, they were definitely the stars and the most famous of the early ghost hunting teams, and was very well documented.
Yes.
Yeah, they were able to really capitalize on showing up at a lot of the places and making them big stories. Like they were involved in the Amityville Horror, they were involved in the Edenfield Poltergeist, and this all plays out in the Conjuring movies by the very talented and very wonderful Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who look amazing on screen, which is, in my opinion, correct portrayal of what Ed and Lorraine were like in real life. I think whether they have so many cases. I think they were like 700 cases that are like well documented, and they had, you know, their haunted museum, which is mostly a collection of toys that I would just like to have. You know, Raggedy Ann dolls, Dungeon Master, like first edition Dungeon Master's guides, the second Black Sabbath album. These are things that were haunted in their haunted objects collection, which is now
It's not too different than my living room.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I think if they saw my basement, they would think I was a demon worshiper. But you know, because I've got Return of the Living
Or just
Dead
a
toys.
demonologist.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Um,
right?
but I think they really had such a big influence on what we see in like ghost hunting television programs, especially with folks like Zach Bagans, where you would go in and try and antagonize the ghost to get a reaction. And I think they did this in places that may have been haunted, but also in places where there may have just been some mental health issues going on, and they may have just kind of antagonized and exacerbated the issues for families that were struggling and kind of made it harder for them so that they could then capitalize on that. Their son-in-law, Tony Spera, still owns their museum. He was portrayed in last Conjuring movie. Now we're getting a prequel, so that was all a lie. But he still leases out their building, and currently conservative comedian Matt Rife is the current leaser of the Warrens' house. Besides their portrayal in The Conjuring, which I think the first Conjuring movie is legitimately scary, and I absolutely enjoy it. I think 2, 3, and 4 are terrible. I regret going to see 4 because it was so successful that now we're getting a prequel. I should have, you know, stuck to my guns and said, no, I'm not going to go see this, but it was the most financially successful horror movie of 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah. And But they have been portrayed in a bunch of other ways, and I do want to call out the movie WNUF Halloween Special, which is my favorite Halloween. Like, I have to watch this movie every October. I have like 15 movies I have to watch every October, but WNUF Halloween Special is an amazing like encapsulation of the 80s where it starts off with just a news broadcast and you're getting hyped up to go on this paranormal investigation, and there are two characters that are clearly the Warrens, but they are renamed for the purpose of the movie, and they are going into the Amityville house after the killings have happened, and they're going to do a live paranormal investigation. And so it's kind of this like found footage thing, but it's also an encapsulation of the 80s, and it has all these fake commercials, and it's just a joy to watch. It's like watching a Halloween special in the 80s. So I think folks should check that out.
This might be a little off topic, but I'm going to take a hot take here. When it comes to the Warrens, right? As a skeptic, I went through any research that I have done on them, or even the backgrounds of those Conjuring movies, and I was like, yeah, that's all BS. They orchestrated the whole thing.
I agree with you entirely.
But
Yeah.
I do have to give credit to the Conjuring movies, as they brought horror to the modern generation of movie watchers, and props to them. I was a fan of their early movies. I've watched every Conjuring, but I was a fan of their early movies too, as Insidious as well. In La Llorona, all of the ones that were kind of coming out and sharing kind of the same tidbits of the universe together. But if they hadn't done that, ghost hunting itself probably wouldn't be as much in the forefront right now. And so I have to give them their credit for that.
James Wan created the Marvel Universe for horror using the Warrens, and he built them as the Christian Avengers of that universe. And I think James Wan has reinvented horror at least 3 times between Saw, The Conjuring, and now what he's doing with his kind of tech universe around Megan and Malignant. I'm always interested in what he's going to do, whether or not, it's the same thing I feel about the Marvel Universe. It's bloated. Every once in a while you get a good movie, is basically how I feel about the Conjuring universe.
I agree.
Going back to sort of now a little bit more modern, we have a lot of ghost shows that are on TV, streaming platforms. There's YouTube, all of this readily accessible ghost hunting. Kind of what are your thoughts on how the popularity of these shows like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures? There's a ton of people on YouTube that do it. And, is it sort of helping just by making things, breaking down, there's all the different technology being used, people getting a look at places they might never actually get to visit, those sort of things. What are your thoughts on some of the more modern shows that we have? I know you already mentioned Zach Baggins.
Yeah, I actually want to turn the question back around on you, Brianna.
Yeah.
I think we've all watched a lot of Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures, but what is your relationship to this aughts to 10s to 20s contemporary era of ghost hunting media?
Yeah, I will say that's sort of what started me on ghost hunting. This is fun, and diving more into the paranormal. So I believe Ghost Hunters was my first entry, and I really liked, I think because I enjoy the found footage aspect in a lot of horror movies, that's why I really enjoy, you feel like you're going on the hunt with them, right? And Ghost Adventures is more of a guilty pleasure for me. I don't think anything they do is real. But I love watching it, and my partner will be just yelling for an hour. But I like watching all of these modern shows like Ghost Files. Ryan and Shane are my favorite. And then seeing them visit a place where, Zach Baggins and his crew have visited, and how different it is. And every now and then they might capture something similar, And so that sort of gets your brain, the wheels turning, like, maybe that place has potential. The more I see different people going.
Well, that's a loaded question for me. I'm part of 2 ghost hunting teams, so I'm
Yeah.
clearly involved. I'll start off by saying that it wasn't the Conjuring movies. It wasn't, and Lorraine Warren wasn't any of that got me involved in ghost hunting. It was actually attending a ghost conference because I am a creepy goth kid and I wanted to be around that sort of stuff. So my wife and I, we went to the Port Gamble Ghost Conference, and one of the things that they did there was the ghost hunting teams were leading investigations in some of those houses, and so the doctor's house and the Walker Ames building, some of the more famous ones here in Washington, and we tagged along and seeing what they were doing and why they were doing it, because it was just as much an instructional display as it was letting us investigate on our own. Their philosophy behind it, why they were doing the hunting, what they were involved with. That's what spoke to us. And so afterwards, we pulled them aside and asked them if they're looking for new members. There's going to be a thread here that we can pick up on. You mentioned ghost hunters and Zach Baggins and antagonizing, which is very much not what most real ghost hunting groups do. We don't want to antagonize anyone.
If I could jump in real quick, Brian, I was just gonna tie it to the that's the difference between, like, I really love the Newkirks. I love listening to the Haunted Objects podcast, and they have had these TV series like Hellier, where they've kind of been labeled as the Goblin group, where they're finding goblins now. But they started as ghost hunters. Ghost Hunters Inc. in Ohio was Greg Newkirk's first ghost hunting group, which was a bunch of 14-year-olds carrying around weapons thinking they were about to be in an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but that's how he got his start, and now he is very much in kind of the grounded, like, our relationship to things is what haunts it. There's kind of this, like, psychic phenomena that, like, we're experiencing stuff, and that experience is real, but maybe it doesn't appear for everybody all the time. I really like their philosophy, and I love listening to them, but it is really boring to watch their TV shows because as real ghost hunters who aren't on the antagonistic path, there's not a lot of action happening. And so it is harder to make that an engaging television series. And so that is why I believe, the ghost hunters, the ghost adventures go in there and they're like, "Hey, ghost, show us a sign. Show me a sign. What's your name? How did you die?" Like, that kind of antagonistic approach makes for a better 25 minutes of television than, very calmly going in there and doing the Estes Method, or, like, examining things and actually trying to find real evidence of stuff. So it is that balance of the entertainment versus, like, what are we actually trying to accomplish here?
Yes.
It's true. Like, by its definition, entertainment is unserious, and it has to kind of be that way. But the counterbalance to that is like the Ghost Files, where comedy is the reason that you're entertained in watching that. Even though they do sometimes get a little antagonistic too, it's Shane being that way because he's not a believer. Ryan is very much respectful unless he's being told by Shane to be antagonistic. But they go in with a lot more respect than I see a lot of these other shows. And when they go in and get into the meat of their investigation and all the hijinks ensue, it's almost always because of the people involved and not what they're trying to tease the ghosts to do. And I think that's the key of it, right? So if you got a nice personality or crew around you that can help you do that, that's great. And to their credit, unlike Ghost Hunters, Ghost Files actually comes around with a lot of compelling evidence after the fact that I would be real surprised that anybody could catch. And they do my favorite thing, which is they don't interpret it. They leave it up to you.
Yes, I really enjoy when they do their debriefs and they're sharing stuff, because they don't always share in the episode itself what they caught. And so when they do their debrief, they'll play audio, video, show photos of, like, so this is what we caught there. And they're like, we think it could be this, but it's up to you. And I really enjoy that. And like you said, they're not really antagonistic, which is nice. And they always provide you with a lot of research about the area, wherever they're going. They talk to people that work there or have experiences. So it feels more well thought out and less like an hour of yelling and shaky camera.
And it's always great to investigate a place that they've been. Any of these shows, going to a place where they've been and seeing it, in person, and how quiet it is and how uneventful it generally is. Almost all of the excitement, of course, is in evidence review.
Yes, I will say before this episode, knowing that you were bringing some EVPs for us from St. Ignatius, I rewatched their St. Ignatius videos. I was like, okay, let me see what Brian caught and what they caught, and a little bit of a rewatch to be prepared.
Before we dive into tools and like some of the evidence, like the EVPs that you've brought, Brian, I would like to ask, like, what are forms of evidence that we're looking for? Like, are we looking for full body apparitions? Are we looking for ectoplasm? Like, how do we capture these different kinds of psychic phenomena? Or, like, what are the things that we're looking for? And then we can talk about the tools that look for those things.
Well, ghost hunting groups kind of have two different philosophies when they go into an investigation. There's the personal side of it, and then there's the scientific side of it, if they're one of the scientific leaning groups. So the personal side of it is going to want something that changes them or galvanizes them, and that's like the full body apparition. Like for me, I would need to be able to see a spirit that I can interrogate. I need to ask questions, and it would then respond to me and be around long enough that I can disprove that something else is happening. But for other people, especially believers, when they go in there, they're not looking for validation. They're looking for communication or a way to connect with something that they feel themselves is important to them. But overall, the teams, it's more about, we don't know, right? We don't know. None of this is an exact science. We don't know for sure that EMF readers actually detect ghost activity. We don't know that SLR cameras are picking up anything other than dust in the air. But the best thing that we can do is throw everything we have at it, keep it down to a scientific method so we can get rid of all of the extra noise and garbage in the data and see what's there. And the ones that are the most visible, like EMF readers and spirit boxes and REM pods, those constantly show up because there's a lot of feedback in the moment. But the most compelling evidence tends to come in audio and video review, where you don't hear it, you didn't see it, and yet there it is in the review, clear as a bell, like a voice, a whisper, footsteps that nobody responded to. So a lot of our methods when we go through hunting revolve around those two, video and audio, being the primary source of any legitimate evidence that we can come up with. But I'll be the first to say that legitimate word is in quotation marks because we still haven't nailed it down yet. No group has. And the body of evidence that we're gathering is to hopefully one day find the thing that really makes it.
Do we want to go deeper on some? You just mentioned a bunch of different potential tools that you would use in collecting this evidence. Can we get a breakdown of what some of those different tools are?
Absolutely. So every ghost hunter should be walking into a scene with EVP, or sorry, every ghost hunter should be walking into the scene with an EMF detector. And you don't have to get one of those expensive ones. An EMF detector is an electromagnetic frequency responder. It is a tool that will, when there is a spike or a valley of electromagnetic interference in your area, that it would then alert you in some way. And some of the better tools will actually show you the dips as well as the spikes. So if you've ever seen somebody hold something in their hand that might have like a bar or a needle on it that moves, or the more fancy ones, or not fancy, but the more bells and whistles kind where they have lights and sounds that go off, That's what those are. They're detecting changes in the electromagnetic field around it. And the core concept to that is that as living creatures, we're constantly giving off energy all the time. We glow. Under infrared light, we glow brightly. And under EMF detection, we radiate a field, each and every one of us. So if we are giving off this energy biologically, and if our nervous systems are based off of this internally, maybe there's energy that carries on afterwards. And if that's true, then you need a tool that would detect that kind of energy. And easiest way to do that is through disruption. So rather than detecting, yes, this is a spiritual entity, this is the energy signature of one, which we have not been able to do yet, we can just detect the disruption around the ambient energy. And so we use things like the EMF meter for that. Everything else that I kind of mentioned along those, like the REM pod. So a REM pod is essentially an EMF detector that has a long antenna on it and a very loud buzzer or chime noise and a bunch of flashy lights. The lights that indicate how close or how disruptive the electromagnetic field around it is being disrupted. And they're meant to be set aside so that you can stay away from it, so that hopefully nothing that you are using, your equipment or the people involved, are setting it off. What was another one that I mentioned?
There was a certain kind of camera, the SLR camera. Was that correct?
Yeah, SLR cameras. So an SLR camera is actually kind of a weird reuse of technology that already existed. So if anybody ever was an Xbox fan, especially around the Xbox 360, you might have had that camera set up that looked at you, and when you calibrated it, you would see that it would put this wire frame over you, like a stickman figure over you, and that's how it was detecting you in the space.
This was
People realized that
I think it was called the Kinect camera.
yes, the Kinect camera. Yes.
Yeah, and it showed up in Paranormal Activity 3. They used it to detect Toby, their demon.
Yes. And so we will actually use a tool like that. Again, we don't know if it's really working, but what it does do is, like, if you point it at a dark hallway and you see a figure show up and it's it proportionally correct to being in the doorway or in the hallway, and it comes towards you or walks away, then it's kind of compelling, right? And if you could back it up with an EVP in the area or video evidence in the area, then you are starting to gather bits of information that might lead to a positive identification. But as a technology, you'll always find these cobbled together Kinect cameras and tablets and whatnot and battery systems, because no one's redeveloped it. No one has really gone forward with it. It's more on the gimmicky side of the tools. Other tools that we walk in there with are one of my favorite is the tri-field meter. Tri-field meter is actually a professional tool, a professional level tool that electricians and cable operators and light inspectors will use. And what it does is, while it's engaged, it is listening to all of the different kinds of electromagnetic activity that's in the area, ranging from radio waves to cell phones, Wi-Fi. And it actually tells you that that's the type of signal it's picking up. But what's more important than any of that is that it logs. So as you walk through an area with a tri-field meter, you'll be able to establish a baseline of what kind of fields are in the area anyway. So, for example, we did an investigation at the lighthouse at Fort Worden in Port Townsend. And that lighthouse is not used, I mean, it's still used for ships that are coming by, but it's not the primary method of navigating that channel anymore. And right next to it is a giant radar tower. And that radar tower puts out tons of frequency, right?
Yeah.
So we go in there with our equipment. We set up the EMF readers, and everything else, and they're just going crazy. It's hog wild, and you can almost get it to go off just by moving it closer to a window or something. So the tri-field meter would then show up and kind of catalog why this is happening. If both meters go off and the tri-field meter says, well, that's because a radar signal just passed overhead, then you can eliminate that junk data. I can get into more about some of the other tools. We're kind of getting esoteric about them right now, but the one tool that everybody has, almost everybody has, that everybody should be bringing with them is their cell phone. Your cell phone does a few things that we will actually still use our phones for, as long as you put them in airplane mode. They record audio. Again, audio is probably one of the primary ways that we can gather any sort of reliable evidence. So you have a digital recorder in your pocket, turn it on, let it run. It has a camera, both still pictures and video. And oftentimes these newer high-end cell phones have like night vision augmented or infrared augmented capturing. So you can use that to try to pick up on some things. Most cell phones also have a compass built in. The compass orients itself based on magnetic fields, and so you have yourself a visual EMF reader right there on your phone. Things like that. So you don't have to get any of these fancy tools with fancy names on it. You can go in there with a cell phone and be just as good as anyone else, provided your method is sound.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about. I mean, obviously the phone is the most convenient thing, and it does have all of those tools built in. But we are going to listen to a couple of EVPs that you've brought, Brian, and I think we would be remiss to not talk about, kind of what the most famous tool that is used to capture EVPs in the various kinds of spirit boxes. Can you walk us through a little bit how a spirit box works and maybe some of its different applications?
Sure, absolutely. So a spirit box is essentially just a radio. It is a radio that is intentionally not able to get really good reception. What sets it apart from a regular radio is that they're usually built with the ability to go through the radio frequencies at a rapid pace, either forwards or backwards. It can switch between AM and FM as needed. And the way that a spirit box is supposed to work, it operates under two principles. Principle one is that any ambient energy in an area is something that a ghost or an apparition or demon or whatever could use to empower them to manifest or to do a thing. So the white noise that is coming out of a spirit box, just like the noise that might come out of a rain machine or running water, which is why you hear a lot of paranormal activity happening around running water or in places where there's you can turn on faucets. That white noise is considered to be a very potent or ambient energy source that a spirit can tap into. The other side of it is that while you're going through these channels and generating this white noise, you will hear pockets of activity, whether it's a voice, a word being said on one of the radio stations. And if you're channeling through the channels fast enough, then you are likely not going to hear a complete word. So if you come across a radio station that's advertising selling a car, and they're saying come on down, when you pass through that radio station, you wouldn't hear come on or down. You wouldn't hear any of those words, but you might hear a k or a d or whatever. And then on the next channel, which would be far enough away from the previous one that you're not picking up on that radio station anymore, if you continue to hear that word or another series of words, then we are picking that up as maybe a voice is coming through. Maybe the signals are being manipulated on the way in. I'm going to take an aside here real quick and say a lot of these tools, a lot of ghost hunting, especially on TV, we're assuming that these ghosts know how to work with them. If we have a spirit box running or we have a REM pod in the middle of the floor and we say walk towards that REM pod or hey, speak through the spirit box, we're assuming the ghost knows intrinsically how to manipulate the energy around them to do that. We're giving them a lot of credit here. And they might not. Jury's out. And while we are still trying to figure that out, this is one of those tools that can do that. And so to kind of put a bow on it, the spirit box is there to see whether or not we can pick out any voices. Due to human nature, though, it is prone to hearing things. Our brains are built to pick out patterns, and we will pick out patterns in noise even when it's not there. And we will do that really, really easy. Pareidolia. One of the ways that when we use the spirit box, we very rarely just let it play. We very rarely just put it on and just see if anybody says anything and then point at it going, oh, look, see, it said something. We almost always use a method that tries to eliminate the variables, and that method is called Estes. And the Estes method is very simple. Whoever's listening to the spirit box, they do it on headphones. They put on a blindfold, and they're otherwise tuned out to the world around them so that they only hear and they could only react to whatever's going on in their ears. And then whenever they do hear something, they say it out loud. That's it. The other person, in an Estes method, there's usually two. The other person is the one asking questions, the one either antagonizing or interrogating or just passively trying to get some sort of interaction out of spirits in the area. And it adds legitimacy to the spirit box when the responses that the person is saying, when they have no clue what's going on, line up or seem to answer the questions that are being asked by the person next to them.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that
and
Estes method is really compelling when everything lines up like that.
absolutely. And, this was developed by one of the members of the Newkirk's team, Connor, and he's the producer on their program. It's called the Estes Method because they developed it in Estes Park, Colorado, which is where the Stanley Hotel is, which is also where Stephen King stayed when he based The Shining on that hotel. And Connor and a few other folks worked at the hotel, actually ran the ghost tours there. When they were bought by a different company, they kind of wanted to shut down all of the ghost hunters. So it was originally going to be called the Stanley Method, ended up becoming the Estes Method because they were upset with the treatment they were receiving from the company that then owned the Stanley Hotel. And you can see Dana Newkirk use this method fairly regularly in their programs like Hellier and some of the other shows that they've put together. And they also did a very extensive history and talk about how you build the right kind of spirit box to do the Estes method, talking about the interference of magnetism and how a ghost might actually be able to interact with it or how we're able to interpret it. But I think one thing that I took away from listening to that series and learning about the Estes method is that white noise and kind of blocking everything out, having your eyes closed, having blindfold on, having headphones on, it brings us into a meditative state. It
Yes, it
kind of
does.
connects us to a greater, the unconscious state or the collective conscious state of, our interpretation of the self and how we connect to other things. And so I find it really compelling in that kind of way, in that very esoteric kind of meditative state. So it's very interesting, and I really appreciated all the background that they were able to give on that.
So the Estes method, so we call that going under when you're the one that is putting on the blindfold and the headphones. And I agree. I love going under. It is probably the most relaxing and also exciting part of any investigation. It's very active. But I will say it's not for everybody. I have people on both of my teams who they have done it, they have tried it, and it is a harrowing experience for them because it is very isolating. I don't know if either of you have ever been in like a sensory deprivation tank or have done like floats like that. It really goes one of two ways. You are cutting off these senses that you normally rely on, and you're being bombarded with this noise. If you're particularly neurodivergent like I am, it tickles that part of the brain that makes it feel very good. But other people find it quite the opposite, and they really don't want to do it. So I just wanted to throw that there as a caveat that it is a very useful tool. It is one of the more legitimate tools that we can use, but it does come with concerns.
Should we listen to some of your EVPs? You've brought three of us here. Do you want to tell us about this first one?
Sure. So let's start with one of the one. So we were already talking about Saint Ignatius. So
Yes.
the one of my ghost hunting groups, WIPS, which is Western Washington Investigators of Paranormal Science. We went to Saint Ignatius, which is in Colfax, Washington, over in Eastern Washington, and we went during literally the hottest day of summer last year, and it was sweltering. It was over 100 in the upper reaches of of the hospital there. So we could really only do investigations in the upper floors for like 5-10 minutes at a time, and we had to retreat downstairs. But as we were going through one of them, we have our recorders running, and one of the things that we do is we all have personal recorders, but we also have recorders that we set off into the rooms, start and then leave, and just let run for the entire investigation that we're there. And this is an EVP from one of those recorders. So we picked up that in audio. We were doing review, and It was very clear. We didn't have to clean up the audio at all. We didn't have to, go back and rewind it and make sure we saw it. It was there in the waveform. We use tools like Audacity when we're going through our audio review, and we could actually see that scream in the waveform. What's even more compelling about that particular one is we mentioned Ghost Files. Shane and Ryan were there in St. Ignatius as well. They went through, and in that exact same corridor, they got a very similar scream.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredibly interesting to have kind of that repeated capture of a similar thing. Was there any doubt that you had that like there might have been something else that could create that? What's the isolation process?
So before we rule on whether or not that it's like a real scream or an apparition making a voice, we see if we can rule out anybody having created it or recreated it or set something else off that sounds like it. And that's where the other recorders come in. That's where the video recording comes in, because then we can sync everything up and have tabs on where everybody is. And one of the things that we do in ghost hunting is everything is announced. We don't whisper. For instance, if we want to say something to somebody else, we just say it with our whole chest, even if we're stepping over each other, or interrupting each other. We kind of have to. But if we get up and walk around, if we adjust ourselves when we're sitting, we say that. Brian's shifting his leg. Brian is shifting in his chair. We literally say that, so that when you hear these weird noises on the recorder, if it's preceded or followed with somebody saying, I moved, I did a thing, Brian's walking through the room, okay, then that's what that noise was. So when we hear a voice or a sound like this, like that scream, we'll go in there and be like, okay, where was everybody? All right, so this recorder was labeled, such and such, and it was on the second floor, close to the hallway near the doll room. Okay, well, where were we at the time that this was captured? Well, it looks like we were all down in base camp. And the curator, her name escapes me at the moment, but the people that let us in to do the investigation, where are they? Well, they were with us in base camp. In fact, we're having a conversation about what we were seeing on the cameras. So nobody was near where this recorder was. And the cameras in the area looking down the hallway and one looking into the doll room didn't capture anything. So nobody's there. So that's how we can isolate that as it's still anomalous. We don't really know what it is yet, but it wasn't us. And when you can have that repeated, which is why I bring up the Ghost Files thing, there they are, full production crew. They go in there with 6 to 8 people, 2 of which are the hosts, right? And they run around and they do the same sort of methods. They put cameras everywhere, they put audio recorders everywhere, and they cut the same sound. Different. It wasn't a replay of it. So that rules out that somebody pre-recorded a screen that sounded really cool and they're now playing it through the pipes or something. They had different people on site. So that rules out that the people that let us in were able to make that noise. So that makes it a little bit more compelling. How are we hearing this similar noise? But that's how we tease it out.
That's great. And you have a couple more for us. You want to set us up for the story for the second one?
All right, so I've got one here that was recorded in October 2023 at the Lewis County Historical Museum during a paranormal tour. Since it was a public investigation, we allow people to go anywhere they want to, or we generally will lead them through. So a lot of the noise or a lot of information that we get out of that is junk, and we could pretty easily debunk it. But this one is interesting because the EVP was recorded in the far corner of an attic and where we stuck the recorder among the shelves and the artifacts that were there. We purposely hid this recorder so that the public wouldn't see it. They wouldn't know that it was there. And one of our investigators, Laura, was in the area in this corner, and she was nearest to the people, but she knew that it was there, so she knew how to cordon off that area and not let anybody go in there just yet. And we could hear individuals in the background talking. But while they're talking and while Laura is there, she is talking on a subject having to do with the books and the artifacts that are in the area, and mentions that they are about civics, the civics, of the region. And you can pretty clearly hear a voice just kind of whisper almost right onto the recorder, civics.
Civics?
And that popped out because all the cameras showed that nobody would have been in that proximity. So another type of EVP that I wanted to show is that they're not always voices. Sometimes they're phantom sounds. Sometimes they're just unexplainable noises that happen in an area. And in particular, I want to point out one that happened at the Walker Ames house. So the Walker Ames house is this very famous haunted location in Port Gamble, Washington. It's probably one of the most haunted houses in Western Washington, if not all of Washington. And it is routinely open to the public. It's one of those places where 3-4 times a year, either during the Port Gamble Ghost Conference or for private investigations, people are allowed in there to investigate. And as a result, one of our teams, Ops, which is the Olympic Peninsula Paranormal Science, they have access to the Walker Ames quite often, and will often set up recorders and video cameras and whatnot, and then leave. And they can have the house completely empty for hours at a time, overnight even, and come back and see what they found. And this is one of those recordings. So when Ops goes in there and they sets up, they're very meticulous about it. They don't ever record anything just once. So there'll be like 2 recorders in the area or a recorder and a camera. And if they find anything, they always go back and they do it again just to make sure it wasn't the house creaking or, a car going by, people outside. They see if they can recreate it. And this particular one is there's some phantom noises that are coming from the master bedroom of the Walker Ames house. The master bedroom was on the second floor of a 3-story building. So there's the first floor, second, and the attic. And the master bedroom is set away from the traffic of the street or where anybody would walk. So it's pretty isolated. This recording is one of 2. The other one backed up the sounds that were coming through with this one. But this was the clearer one, so that's why I provided this clip.
What are we experiencing here? What is your estimation of what this is?
So that's the neat part, right? We don't know. What we know about this is that when this sound was captured, which kind of sounds like maybe a click or something breaking or even something dropping, these are actual sounds that are really common in the Walker Ames. So the Walker Ames, back when it was lived in by the family that actually lived there, they entertained children a lot, their own and those of their family members. And kids playing in the hallway, kids playing up in the attic was actually something that was quite common. And capturing EVPs that sound like a child talking or a woman talking that seems like they're talking to a child seems to be pretty common. But what is less common, but probably more intriguing, is hearing them play with their toys. And we think that this might be somebody playing with either a ball and jacks or a peg and board or some other type of toy that they would have had in that area. Because it sounds like they drop it and then they pick it up again and maybe drop it again. But that is pure speculation. We have no idea.
Well, thank you for sharing those EVPs with us. I think we've really been talking about haunted places, and I think a lot of people know some of the most famous ones, like the Enfield Poltergeist. We've talked about the Stanley Hotel. You see the Queen Mary on all the ghost hunting shows. Winchester Mansion, where she believes she was haunted by all of the spirits that were killed by Winchester rifles. The
I
Bell
want to go
Witch
there
is a
so
very
bad.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
the
and
Winchester Mansion. I mean, I'm not to cut you off, but
no,
that
go.
mansion, one of the coolest parts of it is that it was never finished. She
Yeah,
constantly built
Yeah.
corridors and doorways that go nowhere, and to confuse the spirits that were there. I really want to experience that place.
Yeah. It's on my
yeah.
list. I'm like, I need to go at some point in this life.
I lived in Santa Cruz and worked in San Jose and never went, and I like just kick myself all the time for not just making the drive out there because it's right in that area. But the
Yeah.
next time I'm in that area, it is a number one priority, absolutely. In the South, you also have the Bell Witch. I was just in New Orleans for last Halloween. There's ghosts everywhere. Stay away. How is it? The Lalaurie Mansion. I got to go see that, and I got to see some of the other more famous haunted places in that area, which is really interesting. And I know there is a new celebrity paranormal investigator who was to be unnamed, who has purchased the La Laurie mansion and actually had Halloween decorations set up on the mansion. So that was really interesting to see.
Oh.
And Hellier has had 3 seasons of television now. Whether that's a haunt or a goblin or some sort of other thing where we're experiencing this thin veil through the paranormal, and we could talk about how ghosts, aliens, fairies, goblins, and Bigfoot might all be the same thing. But I would really like to dive into some of. We're a Pacific Northwest based show, and we have a lot of really interesting hauntings out here. So I would love to hear about some of the stories about our local most haunted places.
Well, I'll start off with one that's in my backyard. So I live in the Stillicum area, and one of the most famous places out here is Western State Hospital. It is a mental institution, and it has been here since before Washington was a state, back when it was a territory. Western State Hospital was before that a fort, a military fort. And so it has a long, long history. It has been standing around for quite some time. But when the fort was no longer needed, when the military no longer needed it, and the state took it over and revamped it into a mental institution, this is back when mental health was not very well understood, where things like electric shock therapy and lobotomies were pretty much the cure-all to anything that would happen. And the Western State campus was self-contained in that once you were there, you didn't have really much any reason to leave, whether or not you were ever considered well enough to leave. So they grew their own food. They had generated their own heat. They tended their own grounds, and so in order to keep them a happier population, they did house the male and female residents in separate buildings. So you had the men's ward and the females ward. And unfortunately, the men's ward does have a very dark history to it that I won't get into for this, but it does lead into increased activity in that area. The men's ward is in Fort Silicon Park, and it is at the top of this crested hill. And it has since been torn down and revamped into a monument of the old area. But prior to that, it was a ruined out, almost bombed out looking building that was the remnants of the men's ward that was used by the local police and fire department for training exercises. They would train their bomb squads there, their body retrieval units there, their cadaver dogs. They would do all of that. And they would report a lot of interesting phenomenon happening during any of these times. Anything from as simple as their dogs alerting to something that wasn't there, and these are very well trained dogs. They don't do that unless they are sure. To these experienced, seasoned law enforcement or firefighter professionals saying that they went down into the basement area and were unnerved or creeped out by a feeling or interaction that they had there. And even to this day, you can walk up there and get close, and if you have a compass or your phone out, there's a non-zero chance that it'll just go haywire. And it's one of those things where it's not readily repeatable. So when it's not readily repeatable, that means there's nothing in the environment that right there that could do that. And it leads to a lot of questions.
Yeah, and I go walking at Fort Silicon Park pretty often, which is kind of right across the street from there. And there's some ruins that are part of the old grounds there, and it's a beautiful walk, but it is, there's definitely a feeling there. I myself live in Tacoma, and I think there's a lot of ones that people know from Tacoma. Our old city hall has reports of the bell being rung. And shadows happening because there's the old jail cell down there and stuff. But one that actually stands out to me really prominently is the Rust Mansion, located on North I Street in Tacoma. The Rust Mansion is known like it's so epic. When you drive past that house, it's got these massive columns. There's these lion statues out there. It was built by William Ross rust in 1905, and he ended up selling the home just 6 years later after his son Howard supposedly died of a heart attack, although there is some rumor that it might have been suicide or homicide as well. And since the house went up for sale, people have reported spirit activity in there as well. Every October, there is a kind of a ghost tour that's available there. I actually initially looked into the property myself as a potential filming location. They do rent it to film projects and like photography projects and stuff, and it looks like a haunted house. It looks like your stereotypical haunted house with even a little bit more flair. Absolutely gorgeous house.
I've been in the Rust Mansion. I'm going to do a shout out for Pretty Gritty Tours. They're definitely the place to go to if you want to do some paranormal tours, ghost tours, and really learn about the history of an area. And they allowed us into the Rust Mansion. It is massive on the inside. It goes into that cliffside. The legend of the Rust Mansion continues, though. So I believe the current owner is the wife of a real estate agent. They're both real estate agents, but I believe it was her husband that bought the place, and then he also died. And the rumor is that he has died of a heart attack in a similar manner as to others that have died in that house. So do with that with what you will.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, Brianna, you didn't grow up around here, but you grew up in a
Yeah.
place that is also pretty notoriously haunted. Do you have
Yes.
a local haunt that really speaks to you?
Yes. So I grew up in Ohio. And one of the homes there, so I'm from a small area, maybe like 20, 30 minutes away from Cincinnati. And so one of the homes where I lived in Milford is more of like a Victorian, that sort of era, and it's the Pattinson House or Promont House. Pattinsons lived there. And so it was not even a 5-minute drive away from where I lived. And it was up on a hill, windy roads to get there, but they always had the sign up like it was open every day. You could go. They would have special ghost tours. The local paranormal society would go in and do special things. Um, one of the, they had child spirits, which is one of the creepier things I think for me when you were talking about like the toys. But they have sort of those like cursed items, or not cursed, but we talked about imprints. And so the house still has a lot of the original furniture. I think at one point maybe they had some of the clothing on display and dolls. And so dolls are one of those, for me, extra layer of creepy. And so it's always said that that place is haunted, and you would hear things, and you would hear like little pitter patter of feet. I went there a couple of times. I never experienced anything. I also only went there during the day where there's a lot of other people, so not quite sure if maybe that extra layer of silence or, actually using tools would have led to hearing anything, but it very much, you walked in and you were kind of like, I feel like I'm being watched. It had that sort of element to it when you stepped foot in there. Beautiful house
Well,
though.
that's a pretty good segue into cursed items, but before we jump over there, I know Pretty Gritty Tours, Chris over there, had sent a list of other places he would recommend as his most favorite haunted places in the area. Brian, do you want to run us through that and maybe give some thoughts on those places?
So I'm a big fan of Pretty Gritty Tours. They like to take you through tours of known haunted locations and tell you the history and the backstory of the area. And Chris, owner and runner of Pretty Gritty Tours, has a few standout locations that he thought were really interesting to point out. And so one of the I'm going to point out or start with the Pretty Gritty Tours is definitely one of my favorite tour companies in the area. They like to do paranormal ghost walks and tours of areas that have known haunted locations, and they also like bring in a lot of history to the area when they do it. So it's very educational too. And Chris from Pretty Gritty Tours, owner and operator, provided a list of locations that he thought were very compelling around Washington. Top of the list of mine is Stadium High School in Tacoma. Stadium High School is famously known as, well, depending on your generation, as the location of 10 Things I Hate About You, that movie. It was shot on location there. It was built to be a hotel, and it never quite got off the ground. The funding ran out. The draw of a crowd didn't really manifest there. And so it sat idle for a while until funding came along to turn it into a school. And it has been the building as an operation has only ever been a school. And it has been that way ever since. But it was built on land and in a location that had a lot of displacement to have it be built. So there was native people in the area. And then when Tacoma was being developed, there was a tract of land called Widow's Row that was where if you, unfortunately, the society back then, men were the breadwinners, women caretake for the house and the children. And if their breadwinner died or went missing, that generally meant destitution for the family. And so Tacoma was trying to prevent that from being a total, a hard end for the families involved. And so they established a housing area around Stadium where it stands that they called Widow's Row. Unfortunately, when the school was being developed and they wanted to expand it out into have the stadium off to the side, the famous bowl where the football field is, that's where they were, and they were pushed out, and it was replaced. And though the records don't necessarily go into whether or not that caused any deaths or if anybody died as a result and had a grudge against anything, it stands to reason that there might have been. And during one of these tours of Pretty Gritty with Chris, I was there and we were going through the pool of Stadium High School. Pool is very interesting is that it's completely indoors inside the building towards the basement. And as we were walking through, it's after hours. It's during summer, so nobody's been in there for any other reason. And there are wet footprints all around the pool, as if somebody had gotten in barefoot and walked around and went into one of the locker rooms. I believe it was the boys' locker room. And as a tour walking in, we're walking in through, the kitchen area and then through the boys' locker room. So by the time that we notice the footprints, we're already there and we're accounted for, everybody that's in the tour. And I stopped and asked Chris about that, and he's like, "Show it to me." And I showed him the footprints. He took some pictures, and he goes, "You know what? I wasn't going to mention it, but this is actually one of the common manifestations that happens in Stadium, are wet footprints at the pool." Definitely an interesting place. If you see Pretty Gritty tours setting up a tour to go there, I highly recommend it, even if nothing paranormal happens. It is just it is a very intriguing place to be with a deep and rich history. Some others that he's mentioned, and I'll just kind of go over them really quickly. One is the Orr Home in Stillicum, Old City Hall, Tacoma. Of course, that's a magnet for some activity there. Bradley Saloon in Tacoma. The Blackwell Mansion in Tacoma. That's another one that I want to get into. And Jim in Bakuda.
Great. And then, yeah, so we kind of touched on it in a couple of different parts of this episode, but cursed items. We've talked about a lot of haunted places, but what about haunted objects? You had some experience with this that you wanted to talk about, right, Brian?
Yeah, so I'm a collector of haunted objects, of cursed objects. Uh, in my never-ending quest to actually have a paranormal experience that changes my mind, I don't mind grabbing things that people say are cursed or haunted to see whether or not it does anything. And so far, no. But probably the most cursed, the most illegal object that I have is something called a shoutee. A Shao-Ti is a little doll. It's a little, not plaster, but it's kind of like a wooden resin doll that was, or cement, that was made for burials in Egypt. If a pharaoh was buried in their tomb, the quintessential things that you'd find there, or the food that was left for offerings, anything that they would need to go into the afterlife. If they were particularly famous or powerful, they even their servants would be in tune with them. But something that is not generally spoken about in mainstream media is that each and every one of them would have a little idol, a little Shao-Ti. And to remove one of those from one of those burial sites is considered extreme bad luck and would invite very bad spirits. And I did not come in contact with it in any illegal way, but after having gotten it, finding out that owning it can be technically considered illegal. I am admitting to that crime right now. I have a Shouty. Among other things that I have up there, I have a baby coffin. It's a Victorian style baby coffin. So this one wasn't used. It wasn't ever had anybody occupy it. But it is cursed in that in the times in Victorian times when death was very prominent in everybody's life, child death was unfortunately common too. But they had a tradition. Coffins were not made before a child's death because that would then invite the death. So they were always made after the fact. And in fact, most Victorian coffins were made after the fact for that kind of same reason. They just didn't have stock on hand. Well, this one was made beforehand. And as a result, it is considered a cursed item because somebody would have died as this thing being brought into the universe, being created by hands, would then necessitate a death to have occupied it.
That's really interesting stuff. Yeah, I think when I think of, how I relate to, the paranormal is like a lot of the times with the haunted objects, it's somebody will get something, then a string of negative things will happen, and then they believe that it is the object's fault. And
Mm.
in that scenario, it probably is because now they believe that they have to get rid of that object because it is now cursing their existence. And getting rid of the object is going to be better for them than hanging on to it and thinking that they are being cursed because of that object. That's how it gets passed on to paranormal investigators, and probably 99% of the time, there's never any problem with the object, but that person is no longer cursed because they are no longer associating these negative experiences with that object.
So I have two that fit into that category.
Yeah.
One of them is a genuine Aztec death whistle. And that was, we purchased that in Port Townsend at the Antique Mall. When we were going through there, we weren't even looking for it. We were looking for old tin types or photos of postmortem. Um, we have a seance room where we put up pictures of people who have passed, and the pictures have been taken afterwards. And as we were doing that, the curator came by and was showing us what they had gathered for us, and mentioned that in a packet of these pictures, there was one that they really liked, and they can't find it. It's not here. Oh, that's fine. Well, he was like, no, this is constantly happening. I've got a string of misplacements. We broke a really expensive vase that was on display at one point, and he just goes on about how this is, just a string of bad lucks. And so we look at each other and we're like, okay, so when did this start? The investigator part starts kicking in. Have you had anybody come in here and do any investigations? And he goes, no, but I did get an interesting item that ever since then has been an issue. So he brings us over to this display case, and set prominently in a cloche in the center is this Aztec death whistle. And he goes, this one I know is legitimate. It is genuine. It is not a recreation. It didn't come, you could tell, like, he brings it out, he starts showing you, you can see from the tool marks here that it was made during this time frame. And so he's like, ever since I got this, it has been trouble. And I think this is cursed. And I'm looking at the price tag going, yeah, no, yeah, it's cursed. It's got a huge price tag on it. And he goes, you know what? And he takes the price tag off. And he goes, I'll give it to you for like a quarter of the price. I want it gone. I want it out of here.
Oh.
And so we bought it. Well, we came in there like 2 months later, after we had bought it and taken it away. And he said that day he had gotten so sick, like stomach sick, that he had to take the rest of the day off and he had to recuperate. But from that point forward, he said, I have not misplaced anything. Nothing else is broken. We've gotten some, good, nice items coming in here that sold really well. He goes, that thing was definitely cursed. How are you doing? I'm like, I'm fine. Nothing's happening.
That's great. And,
Oh my
like,
goodness.
I have like experiences going to places like being in Hawaii near the volcano, and like they say don't take any of the rocks or you'll be cursed. And
Mhm.
while in a rational sense I may be like, oh yeah, no, that wouldn't matter, I still would never pick up any of the volcanic rock. And like I don't want to, whether it's angering Pele or just bringing on bad luck, like that level of superstition towards these objects that might like bring ill fortune or a curse on you. I'm just like I'm not gonna risk it. Like why would I even take the chance?
It's also
Yeah, I'm right there
respect,
with you.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
respect as well.
Yeah, I mean these legends are there for a reason, even if they don't manifest an actual negative energy or activity. It's also respect for the area or whoever owned it or the history of it. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have for any of these cursed objects is that as long as you respect them, and they're not there for the spectacle of it, you'll be fine.
Absolutely. Are there any personal experiences that any of us have with the paranormal that we haven't talked about already?
I have one. Takes place in Ohio. So I lived in this house for a few years, and I was a small child, probably not quite 10, so that like younger, who knows if I remember things accurately, you know? All I know is when I lived there, I constantly felt like someone else was in the house, even if I was alone, like by myself upstairs, felt like somebody was with me. And I was adamant that there always had to be a light on because something was right around the corner. And it had a unfinished stone basement. So think bare bones. And it had a well in a room that was permanently locked in the sense that, don't want a kid to fall in a well. So heavy duty locks, out of reach, all of that. And one time I was in the basement looking for something and the door was open. And I pretty sure I had seen what I called the shadow man, like coming out. Ran upstairs, locked the basement door, was told it was all in my head. Of course, as an adult tells a child, you're just afraid of the dark. There's nothing actually there. So we ended up moving, and coincidentally, one of my friends moved in, and we weren't friends when they moved in. And so we had no idea she lived in the same house for a while. And I came over for a sleepover and I was like, "Oh my gosh." And so, sleepover and you're chatting and you're swapping stories and she's like, "Okay, I have to tell you, like, I know you lived here a while ago, but," and she had the same experience with seeing this shadow type figure in various parts of the house. So for me, I had seen it in the basement the one time, that was it. But for her, she said she often, if she was in the backyard, would see something past the windows. Even if like she would see her mom in the kitchen and somebody on the second floor. And so it was such a confirming, right? Like, okay, it wasn't just that I was a kid afraid of the dark. Somebody else experienced the same thing. And
Yeah.
years later, when they were selling the house, my friend discovered that somebody had actually died. There was a swimming pool. There used to be a swimming pool in the backyard, and somebody had drowned, and they had covered, like, had it filled in so you couldn't really tell there had ever been a pool there. And so we were both a little like, okay, okay, we feel validated in our experiences.
Yeah.
But that was probably the most realistic one where I'm like, okay, I have zero evidence to back this up, but I have someone who experienced the same thing who is very hesitant to be like, hey, in the sense of, I don't want you to make fun of me for believing in ghosts, but
Well, that's really interesting. I've got
Do you
one.
have it? Yeah, let's hear it.
So I am a big fan of listening to music before I go to sleep. Um, I'll put on headphones and just kind of zone out for a while until I get sleepy and then take them off and go to sleep. I've been doing this ever since I was a kid. And when I was young, I'm going to say early middle school or somewhere around there, I was once listening to music and I heard very clearly through one of the ear cuffs, Jack, just out of the blue. And it was so loud that I open my eyes, take off the headphones, and look around. There's nobody here. You know, um, I listened for a little longer to see if maybe like my mom's out in the living room saying or doing something. No, everybody's in bed, everybody's asleep. And I'd put it back on, and maybe like 20 minutes later, I hear it again. Sometimes it would be a whisper in between tracks. Sometimes it would be loud over the song I'm listening to. I would just hear the name Jack, and it was always said in kind of the same sort of cadence, just Jack. And I would experience this for years. Different houses, different states, just going different places, and it would hear it. And so one day, as an adult, I'm finally living my own life, and I decide I'm going to get a dog, and I get a dog, and I name him Jack. And ever since then, I stopped hearing Jack. I don't know. I mean, I don't have any explanation for it. I don't. Maybe it's just a psychological thing that I always wanted a dog named Jack, and it was just me telling myself that. But yeah,
That's really interesting. I think that's interesting from the psychic phenomena perspective of like hearing that name and it kind of influencing your decision to name your pup after that. So
yeah.
I similarly have kind of an animal related one. And strangely enough, it also involves me moving into a house that one of my friends previously lived in. Though I was friends with him at the time that he lived in the house, and he had a cat that had passed away, and we were very close with this cat. We would play in the backyard with the cat all the time. And when he moved out of that house, my family moved into it, and we kept distinctly hearing that cat's meow in the backyard. So either another cat that we couldn't see hiding in a bush or tree or something. This was in Mount Lake Terrace in the early 90s. Had a very similar meow, or we were hearing the meow of that cat we missed. Spirit or psychic phenomena. But I found that very interesting, and that's probably the most compelling experience I have from my childhood.
That's really cool. That's really interesting.
And it had a very distinct meow. Like, and we knew this cat's meow. That's the one that sticks with me the most. Well,
very cool.
I think that wraps up our kind of surface level like dig on paranormal investigation, ghost hunting, and these kinds of phenomena. Is there anything anybody would like to share with folks, plugs, where people can find you, that kind of thing?
Well, sure. So I'll start off that I mentioned that I'm a part of a couple of ghost hunting teams. The first one is the Olympic Peninsula Paranormal Society. That's OPS, um, operating around Bremerton and surrounding areas. You can find them online at Olympia Peninsula Paranormal or more actively on Facebook. The other one is WIPS, which is the Western Washington Investigators of Paranormal Science. They have a bit more broad reach to where they would like to go. These are the ones that we went with, or all the way out into Eastern Washington. We're looking to go into Idaho later, and generally all around. Both of them are great teams. Ops is currently entertaining applications for new members if anybody's interested. And not only do we do investigations at haunted locations and known haunted locations, but we also do investigations at private residences to help people who, if they think they're having some paranormal activity, or they just need some advice or some validation, we will go in there, gather evidence, and reveal what we find. In addition to that, I'm Brian Blackwood. I am a author, dark fiction writer. You can find my works at brian-blackwood.com. And I also own and operate Unquiet Tomb Press with my wife and partner, Michelle Morningstar. And you can find our works there at unquiettomb.com. The plug I'll give you for that one is that not only do we publish our own works, but we offer services to help other authors publish theirs. We can handle everything except the marketing. So if you want to get some graphic design help, Michelle is a 20-year awarded veteran of graphic design. Everything that you see on any of our sites is her design, her artwork. And she herself is also an novelist. And I myself have over 10 years experience writing in Hollywood as a staff writer, scenario writer, script doctor. And so that's my expertise. I'm an award winner with my novel as well. And we offer those services to you guys or anybody else looking to have a hand up on getting their ideas out of their head and in their hands. Also in March, end of March is the 14th annual Oregon Ghost Conference, where we will have a booth there as well. But I believe the Horror Writers Association will have a presence there. And if not, we will definitely help them have a presence there. I will have a class that'll be teaching in that Ghost Conference from idea to book. It's a 2-hour class where I teach you the basics, a crash course of writing 101, 102, and 103 to try to get your ideas out of your head, get past blocks like writer's block or creative blocks that you just can't get through. And then just after that, in April, it's like right afterwards is SquatchCon. SquatchCon will be there in a capacity for the Horror Writers Association, manning the table there as well.
And this episode will, at the time of recording, we're planning to have this episode out in March. Are there any books we can look for from either of you? Because Brianna, you are also an author. Is there anything timely that needs to be mentioned for the March month?
I will say, so I'm Brianna Malaki, and I am a horror and a romance writer. A lot of my stuff deals with the ghost paranormal element. My first vampire book will be out this month. And so book 1, Hexes and Fangs, will be out before March if you're interested in a little bit of that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely looking forward to that. And yeah, so this has been the Hallow Ian Horror Pod, an extension of the Hallow Ian Horror Hour, a horror host variety show that you can view on cable TV Fridays at 8 p.m. If you're in the Seattle area on Channel 28. It is available on Tubi, Plex, Roku, and YouTube, everywhere else. And, make sure to rate and review the show. And if you'd like bonus material, episodes, any of that kind of stuff, come check us out over on Patreon, where you can join the Graveyard Gang, become part of our Discord, and do watch-alongs and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for listening, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.